Hello, everyone. So this is our mini lecture for today for entrepreneurship, session 3.1 or the marketing challenges for entrepreneurial ventures. I must say this is not going to be an easy lecture to teach. And the reason being that marketing is usually taught over a long period. We're talking about if you're taking your first marketing subject, you're talking about a 6-week unit. And now we're going to cram all this marketing knowledge into just basically a 30-minute lecture. So I'm really hoping that many of you have already taken a marketing unit, and therefore this is simply just a review. Okay, so this slide is taken from the marketing principles class, which is the very first class um, on marketing, and it tells us basically the components of when we do marketing in a strategic fashion. So the outside ring here describes the environment. And what this is telling us is a marketer will, of course, have a look at this environment, have a look at his competitors, and any trends that are happening within the environment before he makes a strategic decision. And when we make a strategic marketing decision, we usually have the 4 Ps in mind. So we look at the marketing mix, in other words, we look at how do we design our product so that it becomes, it creates a unique product that people are desiring. Um, what price do we give it so that it becomes quite attractive to the customer? How do we deliver our product to our target market, and also how do we communicate the basic features of our product, and communicate why people should be buying our product. And also this is where we create awareness basically of our product. And then we also have what we call the expanded piece, which is really more for service marketing. If we consider the people, the employees that we have to hire to deliver a service, we look at the physical evidence, which tells us that our service is very good. And the only way you can do that, because service is an intangible thing, is to have physical manifestations of how good our service is going to be. So, you know, our offices need to be very nice looking to a service customer coming in. We also have to look at the processes of how we recreate this service time and again to people, to our customers. So basically, this diagram shows us that the customer is in the middle of whatever we're doing. So all of the things we're looking at, the environment, the social cultural forces, the trends, etc., the analysis that we're doing, the product price, promotion, and distribution strategies we come out with are all because we're trying to serve our customer who is in the middle. So this is our traditional marketing diagram. And for today's class, we're not going to go into too much detail with all of this, knowing that most likely you've heard of these concepts before. But we'll focus more on how a typical entrepreneur would use these concepts in a more what do you call this, focused manner. So we look at the bare minimum things an entrepreneur would need to do in order to come up with good marketing. So the new marketing concept for entrepreneurs is, of course, knowledge of the basic concept of marketing, but also how do we develop a marketing plan. So at the end of the day, the practical knowledge of marketing is nothing unless we can actually create a plan that we can follow to make our business successful. The next is a very focused approach on pricing. So of the 4 Ps, the entrepreneur always looks at pricing as one of the most important Ps. And the reason for that is this is basically the source of our profit, the source of our revenue. And again, we have to be very careful when we decide a strategy for that. at the end of the day, if you've got a fantastic product, if you don't have a good price and the consumer doesn't see any value to that product because of the high price, then he's not going to purchase our product. A great example of this, for the males out there, we're all very knowledgeable about cars, and we all love these sports cars that we see out on the road, Ferrari, Lamborghini, and we are all in love with this product. But at the end of the day, it's most of these products are too expensive for us to purchase, and therefore will never become a customer of these car companies, unless, of course, you learn from this subject and you become a gazillionaire, and therefore you can afford a Ferrari. So the other concept is knowledge of social media. And social media is turning out to be one of the most important components of a communication plan. So instead of promotion being, in the old days, it used to be very advertising focused. Now we're realizing that with social media, a typical entrepreneur doesn't have to spend so much money on advertising, but instead use social media to communicate the benefits of his product. And finally, market research. So understanding how market research can help the entrepreneur is probably one of the pillars of marketing for entrepreneurs. Okay, some terms that we probably need to clarify. When we say market, we mean a group of consumers or potential customers who have purchasing power and unsatisfied needs. And these are the needs that we're trying to fulfill in order for us to create value for our customer and also create value for ourselves. Okay. A new venture will survive only if a market exists for its product or service. So, basic tenet of what we mean by a market. Marketing research, on the other hand, is gathering information about a particular market, followed by the analysis of that information. So, as we said earlier, marketing research is, again, one of the pillars of entrepreneurial marketing. And when we try to conduct research, we need to ask ourselves, what's the objective of the research that we're trying to do? So here are some of these more common objectives. Number one is we're trying to figure out, where do potential customers go to purchase the good or service in question? So in other words, we're coming out with a particular product that is very similar to an existing product. Then where do these customers go to purchase that product? Do they go online and order it on the web? Do they physically go and buy it from a store? Or maybe you're not marketing to consumers, you might be marketing to businesses. How do these businesses actually purchase the product or the service in question? And then why do they choose to go and purchase that product from that particular retailer or that particular distribution outlet? Again, I'm not going to go into all the points and just go to some of the more points that I feel are more important for you. How does the business compare with competitors? So probably the most important question is figuring out what the features of our competitors are and what makes our product or service better or more unique versus our competitors. So I just wanted to stress that that's part of marketing research. So going and investigating what our competitors do is really a vital part, probably for me, the most important part of a business plan and the most important part of marketing research. Sorry, just missed that. I'm lost. Sorry. Okay. And lastly, what types of products or services are desired by our potential customers? So if we are familiar with who our target market is, and we know what types of products appeal to our customers, then this knowledge can help us develop a product that is more suited for our target market. Okay, so when we're gathering marketing information or market research information, there are basically two types of data that we can gather. And the first is probably the simplest way to gain information from the market, and that is from secondary data. And the advent of the internet and Google can help us look for information that's already available out there. And it'll be really very simple for us. It just takes some time for us to be Googling basically information about our industry, information about what the latest trends are, information about who are the products that compete within that industry. So it's very inexpensive for us to do that. Largely, it's free as long as you've got access to the internet. However, there are some disadvantages to using secondary information, and that is this information, you never know about its validity, its credibility. If you get that information from the internet, you don't know if it's outdated or whether it actually is specifically relevant to your product. Remembering that secondary data can come from external sources, like, for example, the internet, but it can also come from existing companies. So if you have some information, if you're working for a company right now, and the company itself is doing some marketing research, that is a source of information that you could use for your business as well. Now, primary data, on the other hand, is information that you are gathering specifically for the research at hand. So in other words, you're actually conducting this research for yourself, and it's not something that you're picking up from the internet. It's something that you're actually going to be doing on your own for a specific purpose on hand. So an example of this is if you want to conduct a what we call a backyard survey, a survey it's not a formal research, but you could be asking questions among your friends about what products they use. So for example, if you're thinking of coming out with a new hair dryer or something, then you might be asking, okay, what kind of hair dryers do you use? How much would you spend to buy a hair dryer? Is a new Dyson brand a very good hair dryer, and what's the advantage of this brand? All of that information you can actually gather simply by asking questions among people that you know. Or if you want to do a little bit more formal survey, then perhaps firing off an email to the friends of your friends, or perhaps even coming out with something on Facebook where you attract some people to accomplish your survey, your electronic survey. Part of primary data, by the way, is experimentation. So what some entrepreneurs do is they may test market. So they may have a product in mind and they might be selling this on eBay and trying to see what's the demand like. What are people looking for when they're purchasing this product? What are the kind of questions that they might have about a product? So you could have a prototype that you develop, you put it up on eBay, find out if anybody's interested, and that level of demand can be measured in a probably not a very scientific way, but at least you have some indication of how desirable this prototype of yours is. All right, so when you're doing a primary data instrument, in other words, you're conducting a survey, so there are some very specific points that you need to know when you're designing your questionnaire. Number one is make sure each question pertains to a specific objective that is in line with the purpose of the study. So if you're finding out more information about a typical competitor, or who are your number one competitors, that's a question that you might want to ask in your in your survey, because your objective again is to figure out, number one, who are your biggest competitors and what features do they have which makes them attractive to your target market. So that's an example of an objective. So basically, your questions have to make sure that they are addressing those main objectives. Don't use leading and biased questions. So what this means is, again, if you're asking about your customers or your potential markets attitude towards a particular competitor, don't ask them, okay, based on this brand, the Dyson brand, what don't you like about this brand? Or maybe don't use a leading question like, Dyson brand has these weaknesses. Do you agree? So that's a very leading question. You're telling the consumer that in fact it is a bad product, and therefore, can you make a comment if you agree with this? And obviously, if you use that kind of question, you might get a very biased response in which is, yeah, it's not a terrible product, but um, you need to be as balanced as possible. So if you're asking a question about what makes this competitor, what are the weaknesses of this competitor, make sure you also ask the question about why do people choose that brand? Is there a positive feature of that brand? So a common question might be to ask, what do you like about this Dyson brand? So you start with that, and then what do you not like about this Dyson brand? So that's a very balanced way of asking a question. And it doesn't give this impression that as a person asking the question, that you already have a preconditioned answer to the questions. You want to avoid and avoid um, leaning to one side of another when you're asking a question, to make sure that your respondent doesn't feel that you have a preference. Okay, if you have, if you're pretty obvious that you do have a preference on the answer, usually the respondent will try to make you happy and give you the answer that you want to hear. So again, you want to avoid that. Many questionnaires use scaled questions rather than a simple yes or no question to measure the intensity of an attitude. So an example of a scaled question is what we call a Likert scale, wherein on a scale of 1 to 5, and 5 means that you strongly agree. Do you agree with this statement? Dyson brand is a very good vacuum cleaner. So 5 if you strongly agree, and 1 if you strongly disagree that it's a good vacuum cleaner. So those are, again, examples of scaled questions that you want to be using so that you can measure the intensity of how much they like a brand or how much they don't like a particular brand. Okay, a lot of entrepreneurs feel that they'd rather not do marketing research, and they have some common misconceptions about why they say, oh, marketing research, that's very expensive. So cost is usually the number one reason why many entrepreneurs will say, that's for big companies. I don't like to do marketing research myself. But in reality, as I mentioned before, research does not have to be expensive. Um, if you're selling something on eBay, it doesn't cost you much to fire off an email to your customers and ask them, how was my service? Or how was the product that you bought? And all of this is research that, again, it doesn't cost you anything. And the cost is an email, which, you don't have to pay for really. Um, Marketing research can be complex, and therefore a lot of entrepreneurs feel that they need to know complex sampling, surveying, and statistical analysis in order to perform market research. But in reality, research techniques don't have to be complex. They're actually, to make it effective, you need to make it simple. And the basic strategy when it comes to sampling is the idea that the bigger your random sample, the more accurate your research is. So if you're only interviewing 5 people versus 500 people, your results will be more accurate if you are interviewing 500 people, especially if these 500 people belong within your target market. Strategic decisions are not the only major, the only decisions that you have to do market research for. So marketing research can be, you know, very simple. It can be talking about wants and needs, and it doesn't really have to be a very strategic reason for conducting market research. A lot of entrepreneurs feel that the data that they will gather is mostly irrelevant, or sometimes they think that, oh, I already know that, so why should I ask people that question when I know the answer to that question? In reality, though, it's always good to ask that question, even if you know the answer, because then you have some data that supports your hypothesis or your initial theory. And if you got that data, then decisions that you make you'll be more confident to make decisions when it's supported by more data. Okay, so another important um, aspect of marketing for entrepreneurs is, again, the use of social media marketing, and this belongs under the one of the P's called promotion. And entrepreneurs love to focus on social media because, number one, it's the trend right now. And of course, the bigger reason is that it's quite inexpensive. You don't have to pay a lot of money to be using social media to market your products. All it takes generally is knowledge of, Facebook, YouTube, or any other social media that's available out there. I'm uploading this video into YouTube for free. And in a way, you could argue that I'm marketing myself. I'll have this lecture online, it'll be on YouTube. And the more people that read my or watch my videos, and in effect, I'm marketing myself. And why not do the same thing that I'm doing, but in in another way? You can create content that's valuable, like a video that helps a consumer solve a problem. And then on the side, you're actually promoting a product that you're selling. So that's how we can create effective social media. So the first part is creating value with an event, a video, a tweet, or a blog that attracts attention and hopefully becomes viral. So what this means is that people would like your offering so much that they share it with their friends. So a great example is, because I'm stuck at home, I've decided that I wanted to repaint my bathroom. Repaint my tiles in the bathroom. So but I don't know anything about painting. So what do? I Google it. I Google, okay, can I paint bathroom tiles? And true enough, there's actually a company out there. They make paints and they specialize in paint for bathroom tiles. And they have a video on YouTube, which it gives you an instruction on basically how do you paint your bathroom tiles. And you don't just grab paint and paint it. So, the product has got to be resistant to water, resistant to mold. So, and this is what their video is talking about. And basically, I used that video just over the weekend to paint my bathroom. Uh, and I go to Bunnings to buy the product, and of course, what product do I buy? It's the brand that I see in the video. So White Knight is the name of that brand. So I buy these products from Bunnings, and then you've got to clean your old tiles have to be cleaned. You have to apply a primer, and after you apply the primer, you do a first coat and then a second coat. So it's a process, but I've learned about it, and I appreciate, and all of this was done using not much expense for that company to create that video. They didn't have to pay anyone. Sorry, they didn't have to pay YouTube to put that up. They may have paid somebody to create the video, so it looks professional. but really it's very inexpensive in the whole scheme of things. Um, Effective social media enables customers to promote a message themselves with multiple online social media avenues. Or so, for example, for me, look, I enjoyed that process of repainting my bathroom, and I might suggest it to my friends. And I say, hey guys, if you're not doing anything, you might want to renovate your bathroom, but you don't have to rip up the tiles and change the tiles. All you need to do is repaint your tiles and make your bathroom look really new. So I might share that video with them, and I'm actually sending a message to my friends and giving them some advice. But at the same time, I'm actually marketing for a company without me being paid to do it. So the other thing about social media is we want to encourage user participation and dialogue that fully engages customers with online conversation. So I didn't do it, but one thing that that paint company can do is have a little bit of a feedback button or a Q&A button on their website so that I can click on that and ask questions about the process. And I might say, okay, how do I buy sandpaper? And what kind of cleaning instruments do I need? And how long do I need to wait for the paint to dry? All of these questions can actually be answered by a social media person who's assigned within that company to do it. And again, it really doesn't take that much expense. That person can be doing other things and responding to emails and questions from customers. But once you create that engagement and dialogue, it's very effective marketing because it makes your customers more um, uh, feel like there's a relationship between you um, uh, between them, the customer, and the company. Okay, so social media marketing is quite different from traditional advertising and traditional marketing because in social media, you actually cannot control your marketing as well. So, you basically put up a video. If people don't like your video, people will trash your video and give you comments that can actually be quite embarrassing. So especially if your video is lame, or in other words, it doesn't really give value. And because of that, instead of um, uh, promoting your company, you could actually be giving opportunity for people to criticize your company. So that's the difference between um, traditional marketing and social media, because in traditional marketing you produce the video, you produce the advertisement, and you have a lot of control about what you're telling your customers. But in social media, this is dependent on how well your target market likes your product or dislikes your product. So it emphasizes the contributions made by your customers, comments, blogs about your product, etc. And you don't have control over a lot of that content. So if you're making a movie, for example, and people don't like your movie, you can't go around telling people, hey, stop saying that about my movie. My movie's great, but if they don't agree with you, that's it. I mean, you can't really control social media. Um, Trust building. Firms cannot fully control the content users' creation, development, and so therefore, development of trusting relationships is required. Again, related to the lack of control, there's an amount of trust that you need to have towards your customers that they won't trash you. Okay. Remember that when you're doing social media marketing, it's not like advertising. Advertising is one way. You come out with a TV ad, you place it on media, and your customers or your people watching it cannot express their opinion on your product. But in social media, they can. They can reply. They can, if your post is not appreciated, or perhaps if it's too much like typical marketing, it's too hard sell, then oftentimes your consumer will tell you that and say, this is hard sell. You're trying too hard to sell this product to me. In reality, your product is really, not that great. So once you have that two-way conversation, all of that conversation actually comes out in the open. So many of you look at that if you're trying to figure out whether a product is a good product or good service. You might go to Google reviews and find out, okay, what do people think about this product? And as a company, there's really not much you can do to control that. Okay, so when we're developing our marketing philosophy, in other words, for our product, there are three very basic philosophies that we can choose from. The old production philosophy means that you're very focused on coming up with a great product. You're very focused on coming up with a product that is inexpensive. So a production-driven philosophy focuses on. Can you hear that? Okay. So production-driven philosophy focuses on coming out with inexpensive products, perhaps, or very high-quality products. On the other hand, and again, it's the thought that if you come out with the perfect combination of price and value, then it will come. Customers will knock on your door and basically buy your product and find your product. So that's the production philosophy. On the other hand, if we go further on, a sales-driven philosophy is when your main focus is to make sure you're selling a lot of your products. So it's not surprising that you will discount your product in order to drive sales and make sure that you're getting a lot of cash for the product that you're selling. That's a sales-driven. A consumer-driven philosophy is more long-term oriented. So you're focused more on satisfying the needs of your target market and making sure that the product they're coming out with actually has benefit and value to them based on a combination of the price and also the features that you're offering. So a lot of people say that consumer-driven philosophy is the modern way of viewing it. And that is usually the philosophy that I would recommend for you to do. Although sometimes that's not always the case. Now, if you're lucky enough that you don't have any competitors, or perhaps you've invented a product that has no real substitute or competitor, then I would suggest probably a production-driven philosophy is the best approach, because then you should just be focused on coming out with more and more of this product and driving your economies of scale to a point where your costs are so low. So, that's a production-driven philosophy when there is no competitive pressure and you don't have any competitors. But if you do have a lot of competitors, like most people, like most businesses, then a consumer-driven philosophy is usually the way to go, because the intention is to come out with a product that is unique and solves the problems of a consumer better than your competitor. If your background as an entrepreneur is more in sales or more in production and manufacturing, then generally that philosophy will hold true with your marketing as well. But again, hopefully, if you've got a good background in marketing, usually the consumer-driven philosophy would be the way to go. For some entrepreneurs, they might see this whole business as something short-term. Or perhaps they're stricken for cash. They need cash right away, and therefore a more short-term philosophy would be to drive sales and make sure that you're getting a lot of people to buy your product. Or maybe it's also a way of capturing more market share. And as the consumers get more used to your product, then you might consider, okay, I'm going to then raise my price later on to capitalize on that market share that you've captured. Okay, when you're developing a marketing concept, probably one of the first things you need to do is segment your market. Divide the market into segments or groups that basically have the potential of buying your product. And after you segment, you basically choose one of those groups that become your target market. And what's really important is for you to realize, who these people are that has become your target market. You need to be able to describe them in terms of their age, their marital status, their occupation, their income, etc. And that's what we call a demographic description or demographic variable that describes your target market. But you also need to look at other things like benefit orientation. In other words, what benefits does your target market seek when they're buying your product? Are they buying your product because it's cheap? Are they buying your product because it's convenient? Are they buying it because it depends on the nature of a particular new venture? Maybe it's something exciting. Does it sort of uplift their social status when they buy it? So that's an example of a benefit that they're using to basically buy your product, or it's a motivation they're using to buy your product. The other approach is having a look at how they behave. Where do they basically buy their things? Are they more internet driven, or do they like shopping inside a mall, etc.? So that's an example of behavioral variables. Another question to ask is, or another question, so to answer in describing your target market is figuring out where do they live, what part of the city do they live, where do they work? Do they work in the city? Do they work in the suburb? All of that can form a major part of your target market description. But to give you an example, if you're providing a service like a barber shop or a salon, if obviously you're very location based, which means that the service that you provide has to be somewhere that's convenient to your target market. Doesn't make any sense to be marketing your product to people from Hillside, the west side of the city, when your salon is based in the east side of the city. So it takes too much time for a consumer to go from one point to another. Knowing where your customers live will enable you to really focus on the areas where they're more likely to be buying or using your products. Another question to ask is, what are their motivations for buying? And that would be the psychographic variable. Are they buying your product because of a physiological reason, like they're hungry and therefore they need to fulfill that hunger? Are they buying it because they're driven by ambition and buying your product helps them achieve their goals? Are they buying your product for esteem reasons, for improving their social status within the community? Again, these are examples of psychographic motivation. Okay, so here's an example of having a look at both the behavioral and also the demographic variables in trying to describe your target market. So, and we're using a typical family life cycle. And, a consumer might start out as a teenager when he starts to purchase his own things. And if you're a teenager and part of a typical family, perhaps you have certain priorities like socializing, studying, and of course, you're focused on yourself. It's a very selfish time of your lives, perhaps as a teenager. And so appearance products, clothing, recreational things and hobbies, these are some of the products that teenagers will spend a lot of money on. Again, because their priorities are quite different from, say, a a person in their 20s. In their 20s, they're more focused on the opposite sex, or perhaps on their love desires or their relationship desires. And so it's all about bonding. It's all about career. When you're in this age, you're looking at furniture and furnishings. You're looking at entertainment for you and perhaps your partner. You're also beginning to think about savings for the future, because perhaps you're thinking about your partner becoming more long term. In your 20s and 30s, you're thinking about babies, you're thinking about your career, more about extending it to be more secure. So you're not after a casual job anymore because you've got a family, you've just had a baby perhaps. So the things that you're looking for would be things like baby care products, insurance, home and garden things for your home, and et cetera, et cetera. So you can see, depending on your stage in life or your stage within a family, then your priorities will change. And also the purchases that you make will also be different. So with this information, depending on where your product, which category it lies, this might be information that will guide you on identifying which target market would you um, will be more suited to be able to buy your product. And if once you've identified a particular stage, then hopefully you can identify where they live. You can identify how best to reach out for them, what social media is more appropriate for that target segment. So for example, Facebook is not for everyone. Facebook generally has a very strong following in the people mid 50s or late 20s, perhaps early 30s. But for the teens and the people who are in their 20s, then perhaps they're not into Facebook. They're more into Instagram or perhaps Twitter, or what the other more hip social media outlets there are. All right, so a very important part of marketing for entrepreneurs is the marketing plan. In fact, this is probably the output that we are looking for when you're learning about marketing. At the end of the day, marketing is really doesn't really help the entrepreneur unless the entrepreneur uses all that information and input to develop a plan. So the plan is a process of determining a clear and comprehensive approach to the creation of customers. So that's what marketing is all about: creating demand and creating customers. Um, and the key elements of a marketing plan will include marketing research, an analysis of your sales, whether existing sales or future sales, developing a marketing information system so that we can actually measure how well we are doing in terms of revenue, profit, or market share. And of course, forecasting what our sales will be in the next coming years or months. So those are the key elements of a marketing plan. So a very structured approach, and which a typical marketing plan will be assessing our strengths and weaknesses, like a SWOT analysis that has a look at your opportunities and your threats. And again, marketing research plays a big role in that. And then we had to look at our internal strengths and weaknesses as well, to figure out how we can compete versus our competitors. We develop objectives, both short and intermediate range goals. We develop our strategy, our product strategy, one of the 4 Ps. Then we develop strategies to achieve intermediate and long range sales goals and long-term marketing objectives, like, for example, capturing X% of market share after 5 years. And then the 5th approach is developing a pricing strategy, or determining a structure in your pricing. So as I said, sales forecasting plays a big part of your plan. And this is what I would expect students to do in their assignment. You need to have a sales forecast, and I'm requiring at least about a 5-year sales forecast, to figure out whether whether your sales are actually increasing, and whether your sales can actually support your expenses within your company. The other important piece of the plan is an evaluation, knowing what it means if you're not meeting your sales forecast. So if on the second year you are not meeting the sales that you're actually going for, then what does that mean? Does that mean that the desire is not there, that people don't really see any value to your product? Or does it mean that we need to do more awareness building for our product? So we can't make those decisions unless we actually have an evaluation process when we're doing a plan. So we need to know, and I guess part of that evaluation plan is your forecast, your sales forecast. Okay, now we talk about pricing. And as I said earlier, pricing is one of the most important strategies that you need to get right when you are an entrepreneur. And again, I won't be discussing everything here because we don't have that much time. But I will say that factors that will affect your decision on how to price your service or your product is the first, I would say, is the amount of pressure from competitors. So if you've got a lot of strong competitors, that's something to consider. And also how well are they priced? Can they price themselves very competitively to the point that it creates pressure for you to have to bring down your price? And this is especially true if your product is not very unique. If your product is just very similar to your competitor, then the pricing pressure will be, of course, for you to try to come up with a price that's lower than your competitors. You need to consider, of course, your distribution cost. Don't just have a look at your variable cost, your raw material cost, but think about how expensive it is to distribute your product from your warehouse to the consumer. And generally, this is one of the biggest costs in a typical market like Australia or Melbourne. And it costs a lot for you to be actually delivering your product to your customer. Think about it. If you order something on eBay, oftentimes the price is, oh, it's only $10, and you say, oh, I'm going to buy this product, and you start, you know, putting it in your cart, and you say, I'm going to buy this product, and then you suddenly realize after you press the checkout button, and the system computes for your delivery, and the delivery is another $10. So the price of the product is 10, but the distribution is 10, which doubles the price of your product. And that could be something that drives you, that drives your business down, because again, if it's too expensive, then the consumer is not willing to pay for that distribution cost. Have a knowledge about how much does it take to produce your product, and also know whether these production costs are going up, and how stable are these production costs. Do they fluctuate? And if they fluctuate, then you're in trouble, because you need to set a price that basically, even when it fluctuates going up, that you're not losing money. So those are some of the things that you need to consider in terms of production costs. So the other thing to consider is sometimes your product is a combination of a tangible product, like you're selling a widget, or you're selling something that you can order on eBay that can be delivered. But then you might also be, along with that tangible object, it could be a service that you're also providing. So if you tell your buyer that if there's any problems with your with your product, you can call this number. Uh, that means that you need to have a person who's manning that telephone number, so that if a buyer is calling up, then they can give the service that is required by the buyer. Um, you need to also consider the buying power of the market. Your target market may not be a high income group. They might be very stingy with the purchases they make, and therefore they might end up ignoring your product if they feel that the price is too high. So those are the things you need to consider. Okay, so this is our last slide, which just gives us an idea of how we can create a pricing strategy. And again, most of the products that you'll be doing for your assignment will still be in the product lifecycle stage. We are in what we call the introductory stage. So in which case, people don't know about your product. They're only learning about it for the first time. They're trying to discover whether this product is suited for them. So your pricing strategy can be one of two things. Number one, if you have a very unique product, in other words, your competitors don't have the same features as you, and you have an advantage in that sense, then you might consider skimming strategy, which is you set a very high price, or not a very high price, but a high enough price so that you can maximize your profits on the onset. Skimming also helps you establish a quality image, a premium image, which means again your price is high, and therefore the consumer might be thinking, oh, it's quite high, but maybe it's because of there's a lot of value to that product. Of course, there's a limit to that. Again, my example being the Ferrari example. You can't be pricing yourself too high to the point that, oh, they love your product, but they can't afford to buy it. So, but again, skimming is setting a high price to maximize your profit. The other thing in mind here is that you have a unique product now, but you never know. Maybe 5 years from now, competitors will start selling a very similar product, and then when that thing comes and you will be in what we call a growth and maturity stage, then at that point, you can't price yourself too high. You may need to start bringing down your price. But because in the early days you were very unique and you were the only one in the market, it makes sense for you to collect all that profit early on, because you know that as the time goes by, you won't be as profitable. So another approach is what we call a penetration strategy. And this is when your product isn't really that unique. Your product has very similar features to a competitor. And therefore, you're not confident that if you set a high price, that people will still buy you. In fact, they might ignore you if they perceive your product to be, yes, just very similar to to a competitor. In which case, then you might consider penetration approach, which is setting prices at a very low level so that products are sold not necessarily at a loss, but although that's possible that you're selling it at a loss, and the only reason you're selling it at the price is to increase your market share and make your product a habitual product, a product that they will turn to because they're so used to it. And therefore penetration price helps you sell more of this product, and hopefully the more of the product that you're selling, you will drive down your unit costs because of economies of scale. It's generally my favorite example of this would be a company like Apple. Now at one point in time, they were producing X number of products, and because they're not selling very many products, oftentimes their per unit cost will be quite expensive. But as time goes by, and Apple sells more and more of their iPhones, for example, then their economies of scale start to come in. Their costs will be driven down, and then they can actually increase their margins because of that reduction in cost, because of, again, economies of scale. Okay, I'm going to stop there, knowing that, of course, when you're talking about the product life cycle, there are several stages here: growth, So usually the product life cycle starts with low sales, and as time goes by, your sales starts to go up, hopefully anyway. And because your sales are going up, your competitors are also trying to compete, and therefore new products are trying to come in and trying to compete with you, especially when you've created an industry for yourself. And at that stage, a maturity stage, a product becomes less attractive, or basically your sales will start to plateau and even out. And in the decline stage, your product is just a run-of-the-mill product. There's so many other similar products that basically your sales will start to go down. An example of this would be Coca-Cola. It's already at the mature stage. Its sales are basically plateauing, and in some cases, it's actually going down. And the reason for that is, again, Coke is an old product. A lot of people don't like sugar anymore. They're trying to stay away from sugary drinks, and that's all contributing to this product going down, um, the decline stage. So again, that's an introduction to product life cycle and how we can use these stages to help us determine our pricing strategy.